I'm going to be talking about more in line with what was going on this morning on cities and new data sources and deriving insight into behaviours that previously we only had sort of a hint of understanding about how they actually worked. So I'm looking at route choice, and this is part of my PhD, which I finished last year. So why do you care about route choice? Well, you should care about route choice because it's the neglected part of the of transportation modelling, I think. It's the bit that happens at the end. Once we've worked out that this is where people live, this is where they want to go, and this is when they go, and they go by car, we then go, all right, let's work out routes. Oh, we'll just say everyone takes the shortest path. Okay, so we assume that everyone's going to minimise their travel time, minimise their distance, something like that. Well, in fact, studies from psychology and behavioural geography, spatial cognition say that it's much more complex than that. There's things, people have sort of skewed perceptions of space in their head. They dominate certain features when they're thinking about space, and their decision making in space is very much different to a kind of sort of traditional economic utility-based theory. So when I was sort of looking at route choice and looking at movement around cities and congestion, which is the ultimate sort of end point of all transportation in the bad when it goes bad, I was thinking about, so how do people route through the city? You know, how does it actually work? We've got these studies that make certain suggestions, but they're sort of fairly limited in some respects, usually conducted in a virtual environment or only with sort of a handful of students. Can we get better insight by looking at bigger data sets, should they be available? And ultimately, do people really take the shortest path, or is it more complicated than that? So I was fortunate enough to get hold of a big data set of GPS traces from minicabs, Addison Lee minicabs in London, and they gave me about 700,000 routes of their minicabs, which I then worked out the routes for, and conducted a number of analyses. So the plan was to go through a number of things. First off, look at the accuracy of the shortest path assumption. So looking at whether people do take shortest paths, whether they do optimize their behavior, whether they are regularly traveling along the least distance path, the least time path. In view of those results, and I'll give you a little bit of a insight here, they don't do that, right? So obviously I went on to the next point, which is how do individuals' personal preferences and perceptions influence route choice? And then moved on to looking at how urban form influences route choice, which again, these both align with sort of some stuff in the literature saying that people do have varying choices. We know that from our own experience, and that the urban form does influence how we choose a route through the city. Okay, so first tests were, do people take the least distance path or any kind of shortest path? I basically ran a load of different optimizing algorithms and compared them against every single route. Simple as that. For every origin destination route I observed, I modeled another route, be it distance, free flow time, congested travel time, angular deviation, that's sort of space syntax style thing, fewest turns, and combinations of them all. So basically what happens is that none of them perform very well. We get about a 40% match, well, the highest is about 40%, which is where you're minimizing your distance and trying to travel on big roads, so A roads and motorways. We get about 40% match there, but it does drop down sort of 17% when we're looking at deviation from the target, which is a strange one. So overall, what we see is that if we try and model a route as a complete journey from origin destination, modeling, that's just a single decision-making process, we find it doesn't work very well. So we can't really say with any particular confidence that people minimize distance as a singular objective, right? Is everyone convinced? Well, fine, whatever. Numbers speak for themselves, so. Right, so what I moved on to then was looking at, well, if there's no single optimizing model producing a very satisfactory solution, Is it because people are doing lots of different things, and how do these preferences and these sort of behaviours vary? So what I did was break up the data set rather than dealing with everything and trying to work out a single rule for every single route in the whole 700,000 routes. Look at some very distinct pairs, because what the bigger data sets allow you to do is to break down break down your data into very smaller parts to get insight in particular circumstances. So what I did was take a couple of origin-destination pairs, which would be between two fairly sizable regions, far apart, requiring them to travel across central London. So with a lot of alternative routes, and a lot of potential for variation. And instead of going for a sort of single value that would sort of provide an indication of how well these of what's going on, I've used mapping. So like Mike says, we use maps, we use pictures to sort of understand the world in our game. So what I did was map up these routes between particular origin destination pairs and see just view what the variation is. So here's the first one. You can see that okay. This is between Southwest 11 region and Northwest 1 in London. Yeah, it's about 500 journeys, and what we see is a big split between the traffic. We get about 46% of the travellers going up along the south bank of the Thames. We get 27% going up along Hyde Park and Euston Road, but no real single route being the sort of sole attractor of all the traffic. So there's a big variation in decision making there. Taking another one, this is North 1 to SW1, about 900 journeys, and we're seeing again a split of the traffic. Two broadly main routes, so one going along the river again, one going up through central London. But yeah, there's a lot of variation too, lots of other routes going on at the same time. So this demonstrates that there is a variation in behaviour, but we still don't really know what the basis for that variation is. We know that there's no sort of single route which people are taking, but what we wanted to do was understand a bit more about the underlying causes, the underlying sort of decision making that would be shaping the route choice behaviour. And for this, I wanted to turn towards urban space and the role of urban space in influencing these choices. So there's a couple of things to think about here. Were the role of particular locations. Well, so considering that we see that there is a difference from optimal routes, we want to look at where those differences were. So what's causing the deviation away from a shortest path, and identify the types of features in London that would be influencing these route choices. So taking this first one, what I've done here is look at the pure differences between the actual journeys from west to east London and a set of model journeys using least distance path for each origin and destination between the same origin destinations. So for every single journey, we've got an alternative least distance path, and what we see are particular locations coming up as being much more attractive to real drivers rather than ones which be assumed to be taking the shortest path. So places along the river, for example, along Euston Road, which is along the top of central London, up there, yeah, and along the parks again. So these are really salient locations, long straight roads, big straight roads, that are being much more attractive to real drivers. If we were assuming that everyone was taking the shortest path, then everyone would be going through central London along that route there, a very straight road, but quite congested. So we can look at also, again, if we're people optimizing their travel time, and again we're seeing similar features on the road network being pulled out as more attractive to real drivers than those which are simulated. Okay, so those features have been identified to a certain extent, but how much traffic do they actually account for? How much do these sort of big features account for? So we do a simple basic count on the usage of particular roads. So what I'm doing here is linking roads by their name and then ranking them. So what we see is your sort of typical zip floor thing where you've got a few roads with a lot of trips along them. These are places like Piccadilly, Euston Road, Embankment, as I sort of showed before, and then lots of roads with very few traffic along. So again, this is demonstrating that these certain features on the road network are at the center of the route choice mechanism. The route choice isn't a single optimizing feature, it's based around these particular structures. And we can also look at minor deviation points. So this is again another set of routes between North London and Central London. And again, you see a kind of big variation in route choice. But what you can also identify are the particular locations where there's a split in traffic. So where people get to a point and they make a choice, but they make different choices, right? So these are people going from the same place, same origin to the same destination, and they get to these places and they go, right, okay, which way I'm going to go? Some people go that way, some people go this way. So A, for example, you see point A up there, there's roughly a 50-50 split. B, again, another split, C, another split. And these are points, again, these are decision points in the road network where people get there and they go, right, this is what I need to do. And again, another set of routes between East 14 and NW1. Again, a big split of traffic. We get to point A, a load of traffic goes north, a load of traffic goes west. We get to point B, a few more go north, more go west, and then C's another one as well where there's a big split. But these are points where people actually have to make choices. So again, this is part of the route choice process. And then the final set of analysis was that we wanted to look at, right, okay, given that these features are prominent, they're prominent in the route choice process. So you're getting these single roads coming up again and again and again as points where people travel through. You could say that all routes just travel through there. That must be the case. What we did was look at travel in the opposite direction and to see if perspectives, if people make different choices based on this perspective. And so what we did was go back to this example from southwest to northwest London, where we had the split of traffic, and look at trips in the opposite direction. So in this case, we've got 310 journeys, okay? Now you can sort of see a little bit of difference if you flick between the two, but it's a bit hard to do that. So what we do is use a local indicator of spatial autocorrelation to look at differences in the proportionate flow on roads and the roads around them. And this accounts for where there's bidirectional routes and everything like that. So it really gets an idea of where there's an area of particular flow in one direction or the other direction. And what this demonstrates is that we have two different clusters. We have a northbound cluster and a southbound cluster. The northbound cluster runs up the Thames, indicated in green, and the southbound cluster in red, running alongside Hyde Park. And what this shows that people make different choices depending on which way they travel. And there's no sizable one-way system to prevent them or to force them into making these choices. It's because it's because of the way they remember space. They think of a feature, they think of a first feature, when they're leaving their origin, they travel to that place and they move on. Can take another example. This is, again, going back to earlier on, it's from North London to Southwest London. We can look at the opposite. You actually do see a bit of a difference if you map the two. So it's going to spoil the surprise in a second. But you see, if you're moving from southwest, you get a much stronger flow along Euston Road at the top there. And the clusters again demonstrate this. So what we again have is a kind of cyclical motion where if you're traveling north, you go north first to Euston Road and then travel across. If you're traveling south, you go straight through the center. So I think this is again sort of demonstrating that people are thinking of these features and travelling via these features rather than optimising for any particular route. So, in conclusion, there are a number of things that sort of these studies pulled out. Drivers aren't following any particular minimising of cost route. There's a big heterogeneity route choice, and accompanied with an asymmetry associated with the direction of travel. These certain features are really dominant in route choice. So these straight road sections, they seem to be favoured ahead of sort of angular alternatives. So these places like Euston Road, Embankment, Park Lane, long straight roads, wide roads, which are again and again used by drivers. Certain locations appear to attract traffic, as I said, above the lower cost alternatives. Distance minimization is still important. I mean, routes aren't like really far away from the minimum distance, but they're about 1.39 times the distance on average. And the indication is that route choice takes place in phases, so linking location to location to location. And that is the cause of the asymmetry. So thanks very much.
Thank you.